Welcome back. If you're joining us today, you know we love taking a stack of intense, dense information and extracting the absolute most fascinating insights just for you.
hmm
And today we have a deep dive that takes a very different look at the systems we basically take for granted every single day.
Yeah, we're looking at a highly provocative, incredibly sweeping book.
Right, by Joseph P. Farrell. It's called Babylon's Banksters,
Yeah.
The Alchemy of Deep Physics, High Finance, and Ancient Religion.
Quite a title.
It is. And Farrell makes some massive claims here, claims that force you to look at your bank account and, honestly, your electricity bill in a completely different light. And before you even open this book, the cover alone, it just stops you in your tracks.
It really does. It sets a very specific, almost ominous mood right from the jump.
Yeah, picture this. You've got the classic $1 bill, right? You see the familiar face of George Washington. But overlaid right over Washington's eye is this stark image of a skull.
Just right there on the money.
Exactly. And resting on top of the skull is a cup with smoke wafting out of it. And right alongside that imagery, the author includes these apocalyptic quotes from the Book of Revelation.
Specifically passages mourning the sudden fiery fall of a great wealthy city of merchants.
Right, so it immediately signals to you that we are not in for a standard, dry, macroeconomic textbook today.
No, far from it. And the mission of our deep dive today is to really explore Farrell's central, overarching thesis. He argues that throughout human history, there has been this highly secretive international money power.
A group he simply refers to as the Banksters.
Exactly, the Banksters. And he claims that this group's primary goal has always been twofold. First, to totally monopolize the creation of money. And second, to actively suppress advanced hidden forms of what he calls alchemical physics.
Which sounds like sci-fi, but he ties it to real historical events.
He does. And the ultimate purpose of all this, according to the book, is to keep humanity trapped in a permanent state of artificial scarcity.
It's a massive, sweeping premise. I mean, we are talking about connecting modern Wall Street crashes to ancient Chinese clans and tying international banking mechanics to suppressed esoteric physics.
Which brings us to an important disclaimer before we get into the weeds here.
Yes, very important.
The material we are exploring today ventures into some highly controversial historical and political territory. We are going to be discussing the internal banking strategies of Communist China, the economic policies and secret research of Nazi Germany, and theories of international financial conspiracies.
Right.
So, as your guides today, we want to make it explicitly clear that we are not endorsing or taking sides on any of these viewpoints. Our role is strictly to impartially unpack the author's exact arguments and synthesize his research. This way, you can examine these concepts and draw your own conclusions.
That's a crucial distinction. We are exploring the theory, not validating the history.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with an event that almost everyone listening remembers vividly because it impacted the entire global economy, the 2008 financial meltdown.
A prime example.
Yeah, Farrell uses this as the ultimate modern case study of these banksters at work. And the narrative revolves around one specific guy, a Chinese mathematician named Dr. David X. Lai.
And a formula he created that Wall Street essentially treated like an absolute miracle.
They loved it.
They did. The formula was called the Gaussian copula function. And Dr. Lee had this incredibly impressive background. He grew up in rural China, got his master's in economics, then moved to Canada for a master's in actuarial science and a PhD in statistics.
He was brilliant.
Very. By the late 90s and early 2000s, he was working at major institutions like the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce and Barclays Capital. And he was trying to solve a notoriously difficult problem in finance, which is determining mathematical correlation.
Let's just put a quick pin in that for anyone who isn't a statistician. Correlation is just how different events might be related.
Right.
And the book uses this really simple, great metaphor of two school kids, Alice and Brittany. If Alice's parents get a divorce, the chance Brittany's parents will too is near zero.
There's no correlation there.
Exactly. But if Brittany slips on a banana peel in the cafeteria, the chance Alice sees it happen is, say, 95%. Because they sit together. That's a high correlation.
And if Brittany wins a spelling bee, Alice's chance of winning that same spelling bee is zero. That's a negative correlation.
Right, so finding those connections across a couple of kids is easy, but finding them across an entire global economy of mortgages, corporate bonds, and energy prices, that is a nightmare.
What's fascinating here is how Dr. Lee's formula took that messy, infinitely complex web of real-world relationships and radically simplified it.
Almost too simplified.
Well, predicting the correlation of thousands of different loans defaulting at the exact same time is nearly impossible. Lee's formula allowed Wall Street to bypass that complexity entirely. The math just spat out a single, clean correlation number.
A single number to define the risk of an incredibly chaotic system. And Wall Street went absolutely wild for it. They started heavily utilizing these things called collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs.
Basically a financial meat grinder.
Exactly, where you can mix good, prime cuts of meat with absolute garbage loans. But thanks to Lee's formula, the rating agencies could stamp the whole sausage as a premium AAA product. They were even making bundles of bundles. But Farrell highlights a massive blind spot built right into the math, doesn't he?
He does, because gathering historical data on loan defaults is really tedious. So Lee's formula used a shortcut. Instead of looking at real-world default history, it looked at the current market prices of instruments known as credit default swaps.
Which are essentially insurance policies on these loans.
Right. The formula assumed that the market was already pricing risk correctly. But it contained a fatal assumption. It assumed that economic correlation was a constant.
Wow.
It completely ignored the historical reality that economies go through intense, unpredictable cycles of boom and bust.
So imagine you're a structural engineer building a 100-story skyscraper, and your foundational math just assumes that gravity will always remain perfectly constant.
Which is fine until it isn't.
Right. You build it higher and higher, and then suddenly the rules of physics shift. That is exactly what happened. Because the formula allowed traders to basically create credit out of thin air, the credit default swap market exploded. It went from $920 billion in 2001 to over $62 trillion in 2007.
62 trillion.
It's unfathomable.
And because the formula assumed correlation was a constant, the moment housing crisis experienced a sudden systemic downturn.
The moment the gravity shifted, to use the analogy.
Exactly. The entire model shattered. It could not adapt to a cyclic bust. The bundles collapsed, the credit swaps triggered, and the global financial system was brought to its knees.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Farrell doesn't just stop at the flawed math. He follows the people. You would think Dr. Lai, the architect of the formula that broke the world economy, would be disgraced.
Right. Exiled from the financial industry entirely.
You would think, but no. In 2008, right as the dust is settling and institutions are collapsing, he returns to Beijing. And he becomes the head of the risk management department for the China International Capital Corporation.
Which is an incredible twist. He goes back to China to do exactly what his formula fundamentally failed to do in the West: manage risk.
Manage risk, you can't make it up.
And Farrell uses this movement to pull back the lens and look at the deep history of the name Lee. Now, in Western culture, having the same last name as someone usually means nothing.
Right, like Smith or Jones.
Yes. But in Chinese culture, sharing a surname denotes belonging to an ancient clan, a massive extended family where certain loyalties and historical customs often apply.
And the Li clan isn't just any family. The author points out they had emperors reigning before 2000 BC. A member of the Li clan founded the Tang dynasty.
And during the Tang dynasty, they introduced paper money to China.
The clan has been deeply involved in high finance and governance for literally millennia.
But Farrell also connects them to something much more clandestine. He cites researchers who claim the Li clan is one of the principal families controlling the triads.
For those unfamiliar, the triads are a massive Chinese criminal secret society.
They've been described as a cross between the Freemasons and the Mafia, deeply involved in complex international business organizations with membership estimated at over 2 million people.
And to tighten the web even further, the author points out a specific billionaire connection.
This is where it gets very specific.
Yeah. Back when Dr. David Lai was working at the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce and writing his famous formula, there was another member of his clan, the billionaire Li Ka-shing, who owned a massive stake in that exact same bank.
And the year after Dr. Li left the bank,
Li Ka-shing sold his shares.
So if you pull all of Farrell's threads together, it frames the 2008 financial crisis in an entirely new light. He is proposing the possibility that the meltdown wasn't just a failure of extreme Western corporate greed and bad math.
It was something else.
By looking at the ancient financial roots of the Li clan, there are connections to powerful secret societies, and the fact that Dr. Li safely returned to a top financial post in China, Farrell suggests this could have been a deliberate act of covert economic warfare.
The ultimate takeaway here isn't just a biographical quirk about one mathematician. Farrell is suggesting that 2008 was a successful maneuver in a millennium-old financial Cold War.
By civilization state signaling it will not be subservient to the Anglo-American financial elite.
That is a total paradigm shift on recent history. But to really grasp why the global elite would be so vulnerable to this and why they structure the economy the way they do in the first place, we have to look at the core theory of the book.
Yeah.
And this is where the author makes the leap from international banking to the literal laws of physics.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Farrell lays out a paradigm that defines human history as a struggle between two fundamental systems: closed systems and open systems.
Okay.
And he argues this applies equally to how a society handles finance and how it handles energy. Let's look at the closed system first, which is the system favored by the group he calls the Banksters.
Let me make sure I'm following the mechanics here. In a closed financial system, money is created by a private monopoly, like a central bank, and it is issued as an interest-bearing debt.
Precisely. And the mathematical trick to this system is that when the central bank creates the money to lend to a government, it only creates the principal.
Oh, wow.
It does not create the money required to pay the interest on that loan.
Wait, so if I'm a nation and I borrow $100 at 5% interest, the bank magically creates that $100. But the extra $5 I owe them literally does not exist in the money supply yet.
Exactly. Therefore, mathematically, there is never enough money in circulation to actually pay off the total debt. It is a system engineered to ensure permanent scarcity.
That's insidious.
A national debt, under this system, can never truly be repaid. It can only grow. This forces citizens and nations to constantly compete for limited resources just to service the interest.
It's a treadmill you can never get off of.
Right. And Farrell draws a direct analogy between this closed financial system and our traditional understanding of thermodynamics. Specifically, physics that relies on finite, non-renewable energy resources like fossil fuels. It's a system operating under unity.
Under unity, meaning you can never get more energy out of a system than you put into it. It's a zero-sum game. You burn a lump of coal, you get a set amount of heat, and the coal is gone.
Yes.
But then you have the alternative, the open system.
Yes. In an open financial system, the state itself creates the money, and it creates it debt-free.
So no interest.
No interest. The money isn't a loan you have to pay back to a private entity. It acts purely as a receipt for goods and services rendered to the nation.
And because it isn't tied to an artificial debt mechanism, this state-issued fiat money can expand naturally as the real economy expands. It creates a paradigm of abundance rather than scarcity.
Which is a huge threat to the current power structure.
And this is where Farrell compares the open financial system to alchemical physics, or technologies that function at over-unity.
Over-unity essentially means a hypothetical system that outputs more energy than it takes to run. We're talking about tapping directly into the infinite physical medium of the universe.
Sometimes called the zero-point field.
Exactly, tapping into that for limitless free energy.
Which is why the author claims the global financial elite are absolutely terrified of both concepts. They ruthlessly suppress debt-free fiat money, and they heavily suppress any research into over-unity-free energy technologies.
Because either one of those things completely shatters their monopoly.
If you don't need their debt to trade, and you don't need their oil to keep the lights on, their control grid collapses.
So what does this all mean when we look at actual history? How do these theories of open versus closed systems play out on the world stage?
Yeah, let's ground this.
Farrell uses two primary historical examples of nations that recognize this trap and tried to break away from the Banksters' closed system. The first, tying back to our earlier discussion, is modern communist China.
Right. China essentially bypassed the international private banking system. The People's Bank of China acts as a true national bank. The author notes that it focuses on funding the country itself, not just maintaining the currency for international speculators.
It's an internal focus.
By issuing its own debt-free money internally to fund massive public works, China has been able to build infrastructure and achieve a booming economy, completely independent of the international financiers who keep other nations trapped in a debt spiral.
And that independence is exactly what allows them to act as a counterweight to the West. But Farrell's second historical example is far more controversial. Nazi Germany.
Right, and again, we must preface this by reiterating that Farrell strongly condemns the genocidal, murderous crimes of the Nazi regime.
Absolutely. His analysis in the book is strictly focused on examining their economic policies and their highly classified physical research as a direct, engineered rebellion against the international money power.
And the economic history he digs up here challenges what most of us learn in school. We all know about the Weimar Republic after World War I, people taking wheelbarrows full of nearly worthless cash just to buy a loaf of bread because of hyperinflation.
It's the classic textbook example of inflation.
We are usually taught that the German government just recklessly printed too much money to pay off their war reparations. But Farrell shares a quote from Hitler's own Reichsbank president, Hjalmar Schacht, that points the finger somewhere else entirely.
Schacht admitted in his own writings that the German government was not actually responsible for the hyperinflation.
That's a huge claim.
It is. The dramatic devaluation began after the central bank was privatized to appease international demands. According to Schacht, the hyperinflation was intentionally driven by foreign investors and private bankers who were aggressively short-selling the German mark.
In Farrell's view, the private central bank essentially crashed the country's economy for profit and control.
So how did they break out of it?
Well, Hitler, inspired by an economist named Gottfried Feder, and actually looking back to Abraham Lincoln's use of debt-free greenbacks during the American Civil War, decided to completely bypass the international lenders.
He implemented a massive public works program.
Building the Autobahn and rebuilding the military, but he didn't borrow international money to do it.
Instead, the government issued 1 billion what they called MIFO bills, which stood for Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft. These were essentially labor treasury certificates. They functioned as a shadow currency.
I want to make sure the mechanics of this are clear for you listening. These MAFO bills were debt-free currency backed entirely by the real physical public works they were funding, not by gold or international credit.
Correct. Millions of people were put to work, paid in these certificates, and then businesses accepted them and spent them in the broader economy.
Germany achieved near full employment almost overnight, completely circumventing the international debt slavery system.
Of course, the international bankers retaliated by cutting off foreign credit, so Germany just resorted to direct, moneyless bartering with other nations to maintain trade.
That covers the financial alchemy. But the Nazis didn't stop there. They went aggressively after the physical alchemy, too.
Yes.
They knew the banksters controlled the world's oil supply. If Germany was going to truly remain sovereign and fight a global war, they needed a completely independent energy source. So the SS set up these highly classified, top-secret departments, specifically a group known as SS Development Area 4.
Their mission was extraordinary. They were tasked with scouring the world, pulling suppressed patents, and hunting ground ancient esoteric texts, like the Indian Vedas.
They were looking for the lost science of free energy.
They wanted to develop technologies that could engineer the physical medium directly, to pull infinite energy out of the ether, bypassing the need for oil entirely. There are persistent historical rumors of their experiments, like the infamous Die Glock or the Bell, which allegedly explored anti-gravity and zero-point energy.
They clearly saw the philosophical link that Farrell is outlining, the connection between a system of debt-free finance and a system of limitless open-source physics.
It leads to the author's most provocative historical conclusion. Farrell asserts that World War II wasn't just a kinetic war to stop a dictator's territorial conquests.
Right.
He argues it was, on a much deeper level, a massive, coordinated response by the international money power. They needed to utterly destroy a nation that had successfully proven the open system could work, a nation that was actively researching how to break away from their closed loop of debt and oil forever.
It forces you to look at global conflicts through a totally different, highly mechanical lens. It's not just about land or ideology. It's about systems of control.
Which brings us to the core value of engaging with material this dense and controversial.
That's the ultimate takeaway for you listening right now. Whether you view Farrell's work in Babylon's Banksters as a brilliant, unifying theory that unmasks the hidden global systems, or if you view it as a highly speculative web of historical dot connecting, the real value is the critical lens it hands you.
Absolutely.
It challenges you to look at the cash in your wallet, the mortgage on your house, and the energy powering the device you're listening to this on right now. It asks you to see them not as fixed, immovable laws of nature, but as heavily engineered systems. Systems designed by people, which means they can be questioned and they can be changed.
This raises an important question. If money and energy have historically been engineered as closed systems by a select elite to enforce artificial scarcity and maintain control, what happens to the centuries-old power structures tomorrow?
That's the billion-dollar question.
We are entering an era of radically decentralized technologies. What happens when artificial intelligence and peer-to-peer decentralized networks make knowledge, data, and perhaps eventually even energy truly infinite and mathematically impossible to monopolize?
Now that is a thought to keep you up at night. We might be living in the exact moment where the old closed systems are finally colliding with unstoppable open technologies. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible forces that shape our world, keep learning, and we will catch you next time.